Okay, so we've talked about latent prints, visible fingerprints, plastic fingerprints, dusting, and lifting. And that's where I took you guys over and showed you me lifting my thumbprint off of the soap dispenser. So I wanted to kind of start here so that we could get in since it's been a minute since we visited with Chapter 5. So, what you will see here um, is different ways that we can get them. So there's chemical development of fingerprints, which is where I talked about using uh, super glue to create a plasticized fingerprint. Um, then we have elimination prints, where that's where I have the victim come in and let me take their fingerprints to uh, to show um, what their prints look like so that we can eliminate them or eliminate any of the latent prints that were lifted from being a victim's prints. Um, so there's that. We also have the inked prints, which are kind of archaic in today's society. Most people use digital fingerprinting, but some places do still use ink on paper. Um, but the advantage to digital fingerprinting over ink on paper is with ink on paper, if all of your prints are good except for the last one, then you have to redo all of the fingerprints. With digital fingerprinting, you only have to redo the one print that you're dealing with. So that's pretty good there. Additionally, I talked with this about this with the night class, but I wanted to point it out to you here in the photo on the right side of the screen here. You see two different prints. One's labeled inked print, and one is labeled latent print. But you also see all of these different markings with or circles with the numbers around them. Those are what we call points of comparison, and those are highlighted points that show um, unique identifiers to that print. And if you look, all of the numbers have the same image inside the circle around them, which is telling you that print is the same one. The latent print and the inked print are the same print because they have the same 16 points of comparison there. Which that's how we create the uniquely identifiable fingerprints, or how we're able to determine in looking at a fingerprint that that is what that print that is what makes that print unique from any other print, is those points of comparison there. So there are lots of different patterns and such. The three basic fingerprint patterns are whorls, spelled WHORLS. Then there are loops, and there are arches. So if you look here on this print right here, this is actually what's called a double loop pattern, because you can see how it swoops in right here. Then you can see how it also swoops in this way. So that one's what's called a double loop pattern. Down here in this area, this is what's called a delta. Okay. Now, if you had like this arching pattern right here, like this, but that was the primary pattern right here, that's what an arch would look like. Um, so there's that. But there's also, gosh, probably 10 or 15 different individual uh, minute characteristics of fingerprints that we call minutia, um, that can be used as points of comparison to determine whether a fingerprint, to determine the uniqueness of an individual fingerprint. Um, and because they are so unique because of their points of comparison, we're able to use them quite well in court. Um, and they also create a unique identifier for each individual fingerprint, and then everybody's unique fingerprints on 10 different fingers creates a unique individual set of patterns. This is really kind of interesting. So voice prints, these are kind of like you've seen these in the movies, like high tech stuff, but think of it kind of like sonar, where we literally are able to analyze specifically the pitches and timbres and tones and frequencies and things like that of someone's voice to determine if two voice prints are the same. This is some really high tech stuff. I don't see very many people using it. You notice it doesn't talk about admissibility in court here because this is kind of some cutting edge stuff that we're using, but it is pretty cool. As a aside here, you can see there's a fingerprint in the background of this slide, and how I was telling you about a loop with a single loop as opposed to the double loop on this screen here, where you have this double loop right here. This print that's in the background here is actually a loop. See how it swoops up right here? So, yeah. There's also language analysis, which was, with psycholinguistics, or we call it idiolect or idiolectionary. Um, and that's actually been proven. That's actually how we were able to catch the Unabomber back in the late '90s, early 2000s. Theodore Kaczynski was through an analysis of his language and characteristics there. So that was kind of interesting. Um, so we talked about DNA profiling in the night class, but um, so the thing is just like a fingerprint has all of its many different points of comparison. Human DNA is one strand of DNA is constructed of two RNA single strands, and they all have nucleotides sequenced on them, and collectively they create base pair sequences. And there's nothing specific about the nucleotides because there's only four of them present in DNA: adenine, cytosine, thymine, and guanine. Um, but those four nucleotides in sequence, and then if you capture various sequences of those nucleotides, and then go to compare those to other samples with nucleotide sequences and look for DNA that only has that pattern, you're able to effectively minimize the amount of people who could possibly contribute that DNA. And DNA pattern is accurate when you are able to reduce the probability ratios of the DNA being donated by a particular individual to one in less than one. So if you get it to where it's 1 in 0.987539, then you know that DNA could only come from this one person because it can't possibly come from more than one person. Um, so that's how we seek to identify people through DNA profiling. Um, so then with blood and other bodily fluids, there's blood stains, which are kind of weird, but spatter patterns are really cool because whenever you do a blood spatter analysis, it can tell you the trajectory at which the blood hit whatever it is the blood is on, such as the blood that you've seen on your crime scene in the classroom. And in analyzing analyzing that blood spatter, you're able to determine where the blood came from so that you can determine precisely where and what caused that blood to hit the way that it did. Luminol is actually a thing. It's a chemical. It shows us where the stuff is, but it kind of destroys the DNA when you use it, though. Scent. Everybody has a unique scent. This comes from their pheromones. Um, and these scents can be used to present to a tracking dog, like you see here. But they're it really just depends on whether the dog is going to work that day as to whether it's actually going to work. Here you see in this picture right here, this is microscopy of hair. Uh, or actually, no, that one's not hair. That one's fiber because hair would have like a little cord running through the center of it here. So this is some manner of a fiber, maybe like a thread off of your clothing or something like that. But this is microscopy of that, or a fiber under a microscope. And we can look at things like this under a microscope to determine compatibility and things like that, because I mean we may find hair at a crime scene and then later determine that it belongs to a dog as opposed to a human. So microscopy is very important to us there. We talked about shoe prints and impressions. These are really kind of neat because we basically pour a cold gel into them, and we can actually take a cast, like a plaster cast of a shoe print, like the one that you see right here. Um, and we can also take photographs and cast bite marks in the same manner, and consult with a forensic odontologist, or basically a forensic dentist, to determine things about bite marks as to whether it was a human bite mark or a dog or a cat or whatever it was that caused that. Tools and marks, these are, we don't really examine these in great detail very often, but they can using microscopy. So that's kind of awesome. Firearms and ammunition, we definitely do that. The KBI ballistics lab has over 4,000 firearms for available for comparison. And they're also able to test like gunshot residue and rifling and things like that. Of course, we've talked a little bit about soil and dirt and minerals, things like that, and getting the forensic geologists involved and things like that. So good stuff here. Um, let's see here. Um, Typical things here that you can compare. Not a whole lot of craziness to it. Literally, it's just microscope examinations and stuff like that. Drugs, absolutely. We check those with gas chromatograph and mass spectrometry. It's really cool with some proton bombardment and atomic masses and things. That's pretty cool. Um, Weapons of mass destruction, we generally call in the CBRN team, which you see is this acronym right here, CBRN, and that stands for chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive. We use that to reduce or minimize the effects of those. Documents, please, 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 for the love of all that's holy, don't touch them with your bare hands. Also, um, yeah, collect them, put them into a paper envelope, and then send them off to be analyzed that way. Also, with digital evidence like this, you're really going to want to get into some training courses for stuff like that, because it's just, God, that can be so complicated. So you'll definitely want to take a look at that if you have the chance. Um, these are very interesting. Um, Most of the paints you're going to use, you're going to collect and put them into a vial or something to keep those safe. Um, and then um, you'll have um, send them into the lab for chemical analysis and microscopy. Uh, Skeletal remains, definitely going to be having a coroner check that out, take a look at it. Um, and then, of course, with wood, if you find it wet, keep it wet. If you find it dry, keep it dry. Um, it maintains itself better that way. Um, so yeah, a little bit of information right here. Nothing that's terribly crazy. Discarded items are very useful whenever you're looking for things. Um, the lab will always give you collecting and packaging instructions on things. So if you're not quite sure how to do it, check the lab's website. They'll have that information for you. Um, as always, if it's wet, sticky, and not yours, don't touch it. If you have to, use all universal precautions and be careful about sharps. And then after you leave the scene, decontaminate. I cannot emphasize that enough. Decontaminate after you leave a scene like that. It is nasty. You don't want to take that stuff home to your wife, your kids, your husband, your family, whatever. Okay, so here's a summary there, and that'll get us wrapped up for chapter 5. Look out for chapter 6 and 7 coming to a canvas near you soon.